Hi, my name is Kel and I'm a therapist and educator with a special interest in eating disorders. Come on in, take a seat, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for bite-sized content across the mental health and eating disorder spectrum. Today's video is on the topic of atypical anorexia nervosa. What is it? What are my thoughts on it? And what might it mean for somebody affected? So atypical anorexia nervosa is a diagnostic term, a diagnostic label used to identify a subtype of otherwise specified feeding and eating disorder. The term atypical anorexia nervosa further determines the behaviours and the experience that the person might be having. And as you probably gathered by the title, it is essentially very similar to anorexia nervosa. So somebody with atypical anorexia nervosa is going to be experiencing significantly restricting their food and calorie intake. They're going to be experiencing much of the distress and the cognitive distortions associated with anorexia nervosa, such as an undue focus on weight, shape and size, and focus on food and how their relationship to these things impacts their coping and mood. However, the significant difference, generally speaking, between anorexia nervosa and atypical anorexia nervosa is that somebody with anorexia nervosa is, generally speaking, significantly underweight, whereas somebody with atypical anorexia nervosa might be of an average weight or might be living in a bigger body. Now, I understand that some people find this difficult to make sense of. If a person is significantly restricting their calorie intake, surely that's likely to eventually lead to a significantly low body weight. And generally speaking, that might be true. However, if we recognise that people at any body weight can start to struggle with an eating disorder, perhaps somebody has started out at a significantly higher body weight when they developed their eating disorder. And of course, we know that early intervention when it comes to eating disorders works. So we do not want to be waiting until a person is significantly underweight to identify the eating disorder that they're experiencing. We want to catch it as soon as possible. So that might mean that this label would be given in those instances. Of course, the human body is also not that exacting, so not everybody's body, when they engage in restrictive eating patterns, is going to become significantly underweight. That could be due to that person's individual biology and physiology, or that could be due to an additional medical condition that that person is experiencing. Chances are that many of the people watching this video right now, that's you, will have at some point attempted to diet in your life, and that likely, almost certainly, will have included some calorie restriction, and you may have found that you didn't actually lose weight, or you lost some weight and then quickly regained it and maybe even gained more. So that could also be a relevant mechanism for somebody with atypical anorexia nervosa. It isn't as simple as restrict your calorie intake and become underweight. As far as I'm concerned, and for I suppose the main reason I have issue with this term is that I'm a mental health professional and eating disorders are mental health struggles. So across the board, I tend to see that eating disorders are more similar than they are different. And identifying, separating out somebody with anorexia nervosa and atypical anorexia nervosa in the experience of many people that I've worked with, and also just generally in my opinion, almost creates a sort of elitism around the terms. It's not uncommon for people who are not significantly underweight with their eating disorder to find it difficult to access care and treatment. And I guess that's also indicated by that title of atypical. It's almost implying that this is a less common or a less serious variation of anorexia nervosa. And that's absolutely not the case. In fact, research is generally indicating that atypical anorexia nervosa is more common than anorexia nervosa. So the vast majority of people with eating disorders are not in underweight bodies and do not have anorexia nervosa. And you've heard me talk many times on this channel about this issue of weight stigma and eating disorder treatment. So I feel like to some degree this separating out of underweight folks with anorexia nervosa and the other folks with anorexia nervosa is kind of a reflection of that weight stigma within the system. But we are where we are with it, and I am trying to break down where we currently sit in the eating disorder field and give you as much information as possible so that if you come across this term, you understand what it means. Now, that weight stigma that I'm talking about, I think can actually make the experience of atypical anorexia nervosa even potentially more distressing for the person than perhaps those experiencing anorexia nervosa. Now, of course, that's a gross oversimplification, and people can experience their eating disorders in a myriad of ways, and the severity of the distress isn't associated with the behaviours or the diagnosis or the length of time struggling or any of those factors. However, with what I'm terming here as weight stigma, or with that perception that perhaps atypical anorexia nervosa isn't as serious, or with that difficulty to access care when not underweight, a person with atypical anorexia nervosa might feel a sense of, or even be told that it's not that bad, that it's not as serious as having anorexia nervosa. And that's going to further increase the shame and the guilt associated for that person with their eating disorder. It might even essentially result in them choosing not to access help and support. It might contribute to colluding with the eating disorder thoughts that tell them that this is really not that bad, when absolutely it is. And many of the medical consequences of atypical anorexia nervosa are just the same as the medical consequences of anorexia nervosa. And if the person is experiencing increased distress and not accessing services, or is less likely to access services or wait longer to access services, hopefully you're starting to see why this here might be an issue. In fact, the majority, if not all, of the folks that I've worked with atypical anorexia nervosa have generally waited significantly longer to access care and support for their eating disorder than those with anorexia nervosa. And I'm not talking months or even years. In some instances, I'm talking decades. It's actually quite easy to normalise in our society somebody regularly restricting their calorie intake, because quite often it seems that most people are on a diet. But of course, an eating disorder is significantly more than that in terms of how much it takes over the person's life and how distressing it is to them, and the fact that it is a coping mechanism for how they feel. And those many years, and in some instances decades, of delaying access to care are going to mean that cognitively, psychologically, that eating disorder is more ingrained for the person than if they'd accessed support much earlier on in their experience of having an eating disorder. And that can make it significantly harder to work towards recovery. Now, I want to be clear that that absolutely does not mean recovery isn't possible. I believe that recovery is possible for anybody and everybody experiencing an eating disorder. It's just a case of finding the right care and support for that individual person. So it absolutely is still possible to recover even after many decades. However, with that increased weight stigma and the bias, and maybe having been rejected for services because you don't meet weight criteria, and having struggled for many years, can really make atypical anorexia nervosa even more difficult for the person experiencing it. And all of that parcelled up is exactly why I thought it was important to make a specific video about this here on the channel today. I know so far here on this channel I've chosen to avoid creating any videos that were specifically identifying types of eating disorders. I've talked about them in general as an umbrella term, because as a mental health professional, that's essentially how I look at it. As I mentioned before, I see eating disorders, irrespective of the label, as more similar than different. But I'm aware that understanding the terminology and making sense of the different language and the diagnoses can also be important for folks in making sense of this area of work. So if you found me talking about atypical anorexia nervosa today helpful, it would be really great to hear down in the comments section if you would like to hear more videos talking specifically about other types of eating disorders. And if there's any specific eating disorders that you'll be keen for me to cover, or just all of them, then absolutely let me know about that as well. Now, a little bit of a shameless plug before I end today. If you're not already aware, here on YouTube, whether or not videos that I create get pushed to new people who haven't seen them before is essentially based on the YouTube algorithm, which is based on whether or not you comment on videos, whether you like videos, and whether you share them, how much engagement there is. So if you're finding my content valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you would do any or all of those things for this video and for any future videos that you choose to watch. So that's about wraps it up for today. Until next time, be kind, be curious, be yourself.